Hi there. Let's talk some more about sleep. How much sleep do you need? Well, the answer depends on how old you are. And this graph shows that infants, newborns, they can sleep 17, 18 hours a day, no problem. The rest of us, well, as we get older, 7, 8 hours of sleep is a good night. But it turns out not all sleep is the same. I want you to look at this graph that's similar to the graph that we saw in the consciousness lecture. And I'm pointing to 3 different types of sleep. Slow wave sleep, light sleep, and REM sleep. Let's start with light sleep because that's what happens first when you go to bed. Light sleep is when you're just starting to fall asleep. It's easy to wake up. It's just, you're not really deeply into it yet, but you're relaxed. Slow wave sleep is when you're sleeping very deeply. There's very little brain activity. It's very hard to wake somebody up when they're in this deep sleep or slow wave sleep. And then finally, there's REM sleep. And REM stands not for the band, but for rapid eye movements. Actually, I think the band took their name from REM. REM. REM sleep is the sleep associated with dreaming. Your brain makes it look like you're awake. How do scientists differentiate between these 3 different types of sleep? Well, I mentioned the word waves. That's important. What researchers do is measure brain waves, and they use differences in this brain activity to differentiate between different types of sleep. Now, how do they measure brain waves? Well, if somebody's having trouble sleeping, they go into a sleep lab and they're hooked up to a system that looks like this picture here. Basically, they put on a hairnet or have a lot of these sensors attached to their scalp, some around their eyes so you can see their eye movement. And those sensors, we call them EEG, electroencephalogram, EEG. EEGs measure brain activity just on the surface of the brain. Okay, so not the deep into the brain, but just remember that brain bark, cerebral cortex? It's measuring that, the activity of the top layers of the cerebral cortex. And the activity in your brain changes while you sleep. Okay, let's look at the graph here on the right. You can see EEG. These are waves. On the horizontal axis is time. The top squiggly mark, those are brain waves for somebody who is awake and conscious. The brain waves are very fast and very short, low voltage. When you're just starting to fall asleep, those brain waves, they're associated with somebody who's relaxing. It's very easy to wake someone up from this light sleep. It's also where older people spend most of their time sleeping. It's not very deep. Deep sleep, what I want you to see, is that the waves get bigger and wider apart. They're slower waves, which is why we call deep sleep slow wave sleep. In this stage, the body is recovering. It's very hard to wake somebody up. The brain is not really responsive to what's happening in the outside world, right? So you can yell at someone and they just sleep right through it. It means they're in deep sleep. Deep sleep, you are able during deep sleep to move around. We'll talk about REM sleep later where there's some paralysis. But during deep sleep, you're able to move around. So when you're flip-flopping in bed, that's probably deep sleep. Or if you're sleepwalking or sleep-talking, that could be deep sleep too. And we'll talk about that in the next lecture. Okay, what happens during REM sleep? Well, what I want you to see is, on this graph is compare the bottom line and the top line. Short little squiggly lines in both cases. So rapid eye movement sleep is called paradoxical sleep because your brain looks a lot like it looks when it's awake and relaxed. Most dreaming occurs during REM sleep. Not all of it. Some people experience dreams during deep sleep too, but most of our dreams, certainly our most vivid dreams, occur during this REM sleep. So I've put on this next graph, I've placed REM sleep and deep sleep right next to each other so we can easily compare and contrast. REM sleep, the EEG signal is very rapid and short, low voltage. EEG signals for slow wave sleep are slow. During REM sleep, your body is very still. It's a kind of paralysis. In fact, sometimes when you wake up, have you ever woken up and it's felt like your body was paralyzed or like someone was sitting on top of you? We'll get to that. Okay, so you're sort of paralyzed a little bit, except for your eyes, during REM sleep. During deep sleep, you have reasonable muscle tone. Not the same level of muscle tone that you'd have when you were awake, but enough to stand up and maintain body posture. During REM sleep, you have rapid eye movements. During slow wave sleep, you don't. During REM sleep, genitals are active. During slow wave sleep, they're not. And dreams are associated with REM sleep. Okay. It turns out that when you go to sleep at night, you go through several cycles. We call them sleep cycles. You may go through 5 or 6 of these cycles a night. Each one lasts about half an hour, and you start out, well, originally when you go to bed, you're awake, but you start out in light sleep, and then you drop down into deep, slow wave sleep, and then you have REM sleep. And you do that cycle. Each cycle takes about an hour and a half. You do that cycle 5 or 6 times a night. Now, the cycles change as you sleep. During the night, they change. At the beginning of your cycle, sleep cycle, there's very little REM sleep. Then the longer you sleep, so the more hours you sleep at night, there's more and more REM sleep. And the deep sleep gets shorter. So REM sleep, many people think that REM sleep in particular is important for memory, for consolidating information. Turns out deep sleep's important too, but you really need that REM sleep. And in order to get a lot of REM sleep, you need to sleep, 7, 8 hours, right? The longer we sleep, the more time we spend in REM. If you sleep 8 hours and it's a good night and you're not too old, you probably spend 2 hours in REM. If you didn't get REM sleep for whatever reason some night, the next night, you'll get a REM rebound, which means you'll be in REM sleep even longer, and you're more likely to experience memories. You're more likely to experience dreams during REM rebound. Now, how much REM sleep we get changes as we age. As you get older, less and less REM sleep. Okay? Another good way to get REM sleep is to be very physically active. Okay, so if we compare and contrast REM sleep with non-REM sleep or deep sleep, you can move around during non-REM sleep. People who grind their teeth typically do so during non-REM or deep sleep, that's slow wave sleep. Kicking, moving your arms around during sleep, flopping over and moving in bed, those are happening when you're in that deep slow wave sleep. So does sleepwalking and sleep talking, and we will get there. When you're in that slow wave sleep, your body temperature decreases and your body's producing growth hormone. So to grow bigger and stronger, you need that deep wave sleep. REM sleep is associated with very low muscle tone. Sure, your eyes move around a lot, but otherwise you're basically paralyzed. It's called atonia, and it's a very good thing because if you weren't paralyzed during REM sleep, what might you do? If you're dreaming, you might act out your dreams. Bad idea, right? So we're sort of paralyzed during REM sleep. I'm going to stop right here and come back in just a minute, and we'll talk about why we dream, and we'll also talk about disordered sleep disorders, like sleepwalking. See you in a sec.